Ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests, may I ask for your attention, please? Thank you. My name is Bojan Ivanc, and I'm the Chief Economist at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Slovenia. And my role is to moderate this panel with a very interesting and up-to-date title called European Economic Competitiveness in a New Global Reality. Firstly, I would like to invite dear panelists to come to the podium. Then I will discuss the three main points that we'll touch upon on this panel. This will be followed then by beginning remarks from Ms. Okonjo-Iweala, and then, of course, we'll have a discussion. So, firstly, I would like to invite Ms. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to the podium, Director General of the World Trade Organization. Welcome. Next to her, to the right, please, I would like to welcome Mr. Mojmir Mrak, full-time professor, Jean Monnet chairholder at the Economic Unit for Money and Finance, School of Economics and Business, University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. Welcome, Mr. Mrak. And next to him, to the right, also I would like to invite Mr. Matevž Frangež, State Secretary at the Ministry of Economy, Tourism and Sport of Slovenia. Welcome. Then, to my left, I would like to invite Mr. Jozef Síkela. Jozef Síkela is European Commissioner for International Partnerships. Welcome, Mr. Síkela. And finally, Mr. Hirofumi Takinami, State Minister at the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries of Japan. Welcome. So, before I give you the word to have some reflection remarks, I would just like to briefly touch upon the main three themes that we will discuss today. So firstly, it has been 1 year after the publication of Draghi's Competitiveness report. By the way, it was published on 9th of September 2024. It has two parts, as you know, part A, 73 pages about strategy, and part B, which has around 330 pages, which is about in-depth analysis and recommendation. So we have a big document, 1 year after the document, so we will discuss whether we have implemented something in Europe or not, what can be done in the short term and what cannot be done. Secondly, we will touch upon, of course, the international trade. As you know, the EU is a player which wants to uphold the rules of WTO. So we will discuss what can we proactively provide to WTO as an important member. And thirdly, this panel will also offer a kind of a reflection on Draghi's report. We will see whether there's need for synergies between different policies. And also we will discuss on the role of individual member states, because as you know, we cannot do everything on the side of the European institutions. The hard job has to be done at the member state level. So I would like to invite now Ms. Okonjo-Iweala, Director General, to the podium to provide keynote address. Please.
Well, thank you very much, moderator. And I have to warn you, I was told I could speak for up to 15 minutes, so my speech is 15 minutes. Well, I'll try. But I wanted to alert you before. Okay. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to join you here today in this incredibly beautiful part of the world. And I also need to say thank you to Minister Han, Minister of Economy, and the whole team responsible for trade here for an excellent meeting yesterday. Slovenia is doing well on the economics. Could do better, of course, who couldn't? But I think that in these troubled times, reasonably good performance is to be commended. The global trading system is experiencing disruptions unparalleled since the Second World War. By this, I do not mean that global trade has turned back the clock to the calamitous 1930s, But for all the shocks we have experienced in recent years, global trade and investment ties have been resilient, underpinned by the rules-based trading system built up over the past 8 decades. I want to start with that because of the amount of pessimism in the air about generally a very turbulent world and a turbulent trading system. So my talk is about geostrategic movements in the multilateral trading system, and I want to talk about this resilience. Last year, in a roughly $110 trillion world economy, global trade was $33 trillion and has been growing. Some segments of commerce, like trade in digitally delivered services, have been growing quite fast. Global trade in goods and services continues to deliver real benefits to people and businesses around the world every day. More purchasing power and consumer choice, bigger markets, and better jobs. That's why most countries, most of our 166 members of the WTO, do not want to turn away from trade. It's one reason why we have not seen the escalating tit-for-tat tariffs increases that defined the meltdown that followed the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930, for those of you who are good with economic history, where we had a major meltdown when the global world did a tit-for-tat trade retaliation. And it's also why I will argue today that the current disruptions contain an opportunity for countries to put global trade on a firmer footing for the years and decades ahead. But first, yes, we have to face up to the ongoing crisis. As we know, the US has imposed double-digit tariffs on dozens of countries alongside various sector-specific duties or exemptions. It has also reached bilateral framework deals with a number of trading partners, including the EU. At the WTO, we have been tracking these developments closely and simulating the likely impacts as they've evolved. Based on tariff conditions in place at the beginning of 2025, we had been projecting a 2.7% growth, almost 3% in global goods trade volumes this year. By mid-April, after the announcement of various tariffs, we had reversed expectations sharply downwards, and we were projecting a 0.2% contraction. Trade then received a modest boost. Many of those US measures were postponed until the end of July. US-China tariffs were sharply reduced among a welcome de-escalation, and US businesses heavily front-loaded imports to get ahead of anticipated tariff hikes. So these provided a more propitious environment. As of mid-August, we are projecting a 0.9% increase in global goods trade volumes in 2025, followed by 1.8% growth next year. At the regional level for Europe, we are expecting for Europe, not just for the EU, that goods trade is set to contract by 0.25%. Globally, services trade continues to outpace goods trade. Our last projection was for 4.3% in 2025. Services trade, which is more robust, is an area that is not as talked about, and yet most economies are heavily services in terms of their trade. Barring new policy surprises or the materialization of other downside risks, the trade projections could be nudged up a bit higher by whatever else appears in the EU-US framework agreement, as some of this is still fluid, uncertain, and being still worked out. Since the start of the year, we've been urging WTO members to engage in dialogue with Washington on its and their own concerns, and to avoid the tit-for-tat scenario, which we felt would be bad for world trade. We know the new framework has had mixed reviews in Europe, but we see it as an important stepping stone for further engagement on bilateral liberalization between the two trading powers, with the potential for multilateral harmonization with global trade rules down the line. In that respect, as with other such deals, we are urging parties to transparently lay out and implement these frameworks in ways that could be eventually compatible with the principles of the multilateral trading system. The EU has an opportunity to set an example and bolster multilateralism by concluding a full-fledged agreement with the US over the next 10 years, covering substantially all of its trade and liberalizing this trade in line with WTO rules. We'll see what will happen. I want to now turn to something else I've repeatedly said to members in Geneva and to ministers and leaders elsewhere, and that is we need to ask ourselves, why is the disruption happening? Why did we get to the position we're in today? I know it's not a popular question, and some of you may not like what I have to say, but we have to ask ourselves. Why is also there popular dissatisfaction with dissatisfaction with world trade? To be fair, much of what is blamed on trade these days is not just a trade issue, but it also springs from technological changes that have eliminated jobs. Inadequate domestic social policies in many countries to help displaced workers, what we call the lack of active labor market policies. Macroeconomic imbalances related to excessive saving levels or fiscal deficits in some countries, namely the US and China. And these macroeconomic imbalances underlie a lot of the trade issues, but are often not talked about. So it's not all about trade. But it is undeniable that several of the criticisms the US has long leveled at the WTO has a point. They have a point. Members have not collectively responded to concerns about unfair trading practices, a lack of a level playing field in some areas of trade, a lack of transparency with inadequate and delayed notifications, and inadequate flexibility in the system of trade rules. Our agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures dates back to the early 1990s, before China became a member. And the lack of a long overdue update has opened the door to accusations that the WTO permits a distorted playing field for competition. The US is far from alone in having concerns about how WTO rules are operating. The EU has concerns. Other members, including developing countries, have raised legitimate criticisms of their own, raising issues such as farm subsidy reform, support for development, and even the new penchant for industrial policies in advanced economies. The WTO's consensus-based system of decision-making, while great at giving members of all sizes an equal voice, often results in gridlock. Even our star dispute settlement system has its failings, and unfortunately had its second tier crippled by the US's block on the nomination of judges. The widely shared desire for change creates a window of opportunity for members to reform and modernize the WTO so that it remains fit for purpose and can keep serving as the bedrock for global trade in the years to come. Most WTO members say that this is exactly what they want to do. They see the ongoing tumult and uncertainty in global trade as a reminder of the valuable stability and predictability that the system has provided, the WTO system has provided to the global economy. They continue to broadly adhere to multilateral trade rules and norms and want to reinforce and improve them, not abandon them. This makes sense because the post-1945 global trading order has delivered major benefits for rich as well as poor countries, even if not everyone shared adequately in the gains. The value of global trade has quintupled since 1995 as the WTO built on the record of its predecessor, the GATT, and enhanced certainty and openness with respect to tariff and non-tariff policies. I skip the details on just the benefits. Benefits to the US, to the EU. I'll just mention that our research finds that trade cost reductions between 1995 and 2020 boosted Western Europe's real GDP by 3.6%. The impact of trade in developing countries has been particularly dramatic, especially in recent decades, as more of them pursued outward-oriented economic policies. Using external demand and inputs to turbocharge job growth and job creation helped lift over 1.5 billion people out of extreme poverty. At the same time, the resulting shifts in the balance of global economic power have spawned anxiety and resentment within rich countries and are a factor in the current backlash. Despite the unilateral measures we've seen this year, WTO rules continue to underpin the lion's share of global trade. While the roughly 13% of global trade accounted for by the United States is now mostly outside the MFN most favored nation framework, our current rough estimate is that around 72% of global goods trade continues to operate on MFN WTO tariff terms. I just want to emphasize that. Almost 3/4 of global goods trade is still operating on WTO terms. In addition, the WTO goes far beyond tariffs. Our agreements on intellectual property, standards, technical regulations, and customs valuation foster innovation and trust in traded products, whilst protecting human health and safety and lowering transactions costs for businesses. With respect to disputes, while our second-tier appellate body is frozen, and so some cases do get sent into the resulting void, an underappreciated fact is that members continue to use the system, the first tier, to resolve disputes and address potential appeals through cooperative approaches. You will see that even during this time with the tariffs, several members have brought their concerns to the WTO. Canada, China, among them, Brazil, have still come to the WTO as a place where disputes can be resolved. And the EU is to be commended for coming up with other members with an innovative mechanism, the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, which helps to serve as a second tier to deal with appeals within the system. So far from being moribund, the WTO dispute settlement system is functioning. It needs to be reformed, but it's functioning. Now, in light of all these considerable benefits still arising from the system, some members may be tempted to try and prolong the status quo. I think this would be a serious mistake. First, because the world is changing so rapidly. Technologies like AI and quantum computing are moving in leaps and bounds and will change the nature of trade, as our forthcoming World Trade Report will show later this month. This means we must have a WTO that moves flexibly, adaptably, innovatively, and faster. It must allow more instruments like plurilaterals, where willing coalitions of members can get together to make new rules to respond to the changing trade landscape. Second, and more seriously, allowing the problems in the present trade system to continue would be a mistake. The problems I mentioned earlier, perceptions of unfair trading practices, concerns about level playing field issues, subsidy-related market distortions, and so on, must be solved. They must be part of the reform. Particularly in the present conjuncture, if we do not do that, that could pave the way to more unilateral action. So status quo cannot be the answer to where we are. The erosion of cooperation on trade would make it much harder to achieve other pressing objectives, from climate change mitigation and food security to supply chain decentralization, and bringing in communities and countries that have been on the margins of the global economy, what we call reglobalization at the WTO. So we need to adapt, reform, modernize the organization and the multilateral trading system. And delegations are working hard in Geneva to try and look at, identify the necessary reforms, and we hope that at our 14th ministerial meeting in Yaoundé in March next year, ministers will roll up their sleeves and get to work, because a lot of the reforms will need political will beyond what ambassadors in Geneva can handle. And now, as I come to the end, the key question for the EU will be to consider its role, what its role should be in these reform efforts. The EU has been a very steady partner and a steady support at the WTO, and has said that it is interested in supporting WTO reform. But the EU needs to come forward and be a leader. It cannot be equivocal. We have a set of middle powers, Switzerland, UAE, Australia, the UK, who are coming together to put together a coalition to try and move forward. Singapore also with these reforms. And I think that that's the right way to go. The EU should be working with these countries to support the reform of the system, and we'll be looking forward to that. I listened to Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, just now in his speech, and he actually said a lot of the things I've been saying about the EU-US agreement, where some are disappointed. I think that the EU, the EC, tried to do the best it could in a very difficult situation. Europe has certain weaknesses, if you will, or certain issues that it has to deal with in the security area. And the issue of these tariffs is not just about tariffs, and sometimes it's not about trade. It's about many other things, energy purchases, security issues, where the EU has certain things it has to do and confront. So given those circumstances that are non-trade related, but are linked to trade and are geostrategic, I think the team did the best it could. And what it needs to do now is focus on the rest of the world. How does it diversify and strengthen its trade? And I would have wanted President Costa to also mention its support and strengthening for the WTO. He implied it, but he didn't say it. The EU needs to say that and to be a strong leader, not just a partner, in building and rebuilding and repositioning the organization and the architecture. So let me end by saying that down the road, what we have now is a trading system with a stable core, but which is in an unstable equilibrium. That's the way I would describe the trading system at the moment, with a lot of uncertainty, a stable core in an unstable equilibrium. What members need to do is support the stable core and develop it. And down the road, one can imagine the future WTO as a platform for multilateralizing or plurilateralizing new rules and approaches tested out at bilateral and regional levels. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. WTO members have the agency to act. They can enhance predictability for the lion's share of world trade, and they can treat the current crisis as an opportunity to do what they need to do: reposition, reform, and make the organization continue to deliver for the world. And I'm quite excited about that prospect. Thank you.
Director General, thank you very much for your keynote address. It was a bit longer, and you also answered the majority of my question. Okay. So let me just suggest that we move to Mr. Jozef Síkela. So, Mr. Síkela, I have a question for you. As our main external trading partner, the US of course, is increasing tariffs on EU products, how can we diversify our export base, and what are the instruments that we can use? Where do you think are the quick wins, and where do we have to spend a bit more time to improve access to new markets? What's your view on that?
Well, before I start to answer your questions, I want to react on the question Ngozi raised in the closing remarks. What is the future European Union role? And I can make a bold statement, because I'm pretty sure that, and you mentioned it, the European Union has been and will remain the champion, the promoter and the supporter of WTO and rule-based trade order. And due to my being a former Minister of Trade of one of the most open European countries, and understanding the importance of the trade for the economic development, but based on the fair and predictable rules, I know how it is important. And of course, we are not happy about the fragmentation, but I think this is solvable, yeah? And I can split the answer in two parts, and one is how we want to react globally. So what is the role of the Europe in the globalized economy? And then more like a project and strategic partnership focused part. And I think that links to third countries will play a driving EU competitiveness role and the major role in the, for the future growth. And thanks to our, I would say, active trade engagement agenda over the past decades, we have the largest network of trade agreements in the world. So we have agreements with 76 countries, and 46% of the EU's trade is under preferential terms. And in the context of the current headwinds that the global trading order is facing, we believe in the importance of doubling down on our effort to diversify our trade and investment ties. So our priority is to deepen links by expanding our global trade networks, both through free trade agreements and through other forms of trade engagements. So our free trade agreement network, already the biggest one, as I already mentioned in the world, has recently been strengthened through the conclusion of negotiations with Mercosur, Mexico, Indonesia, and we will work to get these agreements ratified while also continuing to advance other negotiations with India, Indonesia, Thailand, and Philippines, Malaysia, and Australia. We are also pursuing other forms of trade engagement, allowing us to reach agreements on targeted issues in a shorter framework. We have concluded negotiations on digital trade agreements with Singapore and South Korea, as well as an agreement on data flows with Japan. And we are launching work towards a digital trade agreement with Canada, which would complement CETA. And we also want to strengthen investment opportunities in African partner countries through sustainable investment facilitation agreements beyond the deal concluded with Angola. So we are working on the scope of these future deals, concluding talks with Ghana and Ivory Coast, and we aim to further enhance our network of mutual recognition agreements to reduce trade costs associated to do divergences and regulatory requirements. But of course, there is the second part, and I will not touch now the agreement with the US, and there was a lot of political effort, and I strongly believe that this is under circumstances a good deal, much better than basically loss escalation of the tariffs for both. We have the responsibility for hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic and for a big part of the world trade. But we want to have new partnerships, and this is where the global gateway with its investment agenda in the sustainability, in the development of the new value chains, in the job creation is coming from, and I think it can become a great base for not only more FDIs in the partner countries, but also for new trade arrangements in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Síkela. Maybe we should move a bit to Draghi's competitiveness report. Mr. Frangež, do you think the findings of the report do they still hold currently? Which ones needs to be addressed urgently? Probably defense comes to my mind, probably yours as well. And what can be addressed in the medium term also to improve our competitiveness? So do the current circumstances warrant a particular hurry, or we still have time to implement those recommendations?
Thank you. First of all, a year wasn't lost. Last September, Draghi published a report jointly with the President of the European Commission. Soon after, by the end of the last year, Draghi report was translated into the mission letters of commissioners. Soon after New Year, we got the competitiveness compass, and work on a variety of dossiers began. And I would say that the developments since January 15 have just increased the importance of Draghi report and his recommendations. However, if I also may reflect on the keynote of the Director General as well as all the Commissioner have said, I have to be radically sincere. Of course, it is better to pay 15% tariff than 30% tariff. And in that way, yes, it's a pragmatical way in order to protect jobs, protect European businesses, protect European access to the American market. However, the deal made is not something I would be proud of as European. I think it's unjust. It is absolutely not mutual. And if I may say, it legitimizes the bully in the room. So, yes, there is an alternative. And it's exactly what Director General recommended. Strengthening the core of the World Trade Organization, of all of those that, like Europe, advocate for years, even decades, for a need to reform World Trade Organization and the Universal Trade Order. What we see now is a dismantling of whatever the World Trade Order was. It is not a building of a new World Trade Order. It is a creation of the new World Trade Disorder that lacks predictability for both businesses, consumers, and countries. So back to the Draghi report. I'm a big fan of Draghi report. And all three core recommendations, the closing the innovation gap, joint competitiveness and decarbonization plan, as well as increasing economic security and lowering strategic dependencies, all of them still hold and maybe even show a new sense of urgency in order to act on all these fields. If I would say what we see in Slovenia and several other industrial countries within Europe, the urgency to act fast is imminent. Let's see the energy-intensive industries, for example, that really struggle, and Slovenia is not in a very favorable position when comparing energy prices to the, let's say, north or some southern member states. So I'm really glad that within the government, the decision on the proposal of the Chamber of Commerce of Slovenia has already been adopted to implement the new, based on Draghi report, created clean industrial state aid framework with better mechanisms of the state to help energy-intensive industry that are affected by high energy prices. Closing the innovation gap with a variety of new mechanisms that are emerging, with Capital Markets Union being a core necessity. Let me use the new wording with every new commission. There comes also a new European vocabulary, and now we say savings and investment union. And I like this expression. Why? Because it is a necessity to boost investment in our startups, in our scale-ups, but it's also a necessity to create a better alternative for the savings of our citizens. In Slovenia alone, more than 30 billion of savings lay on the banks, where there are numerous better alternatives to invest, to support businesses, to support their growth and their internationalization. So what we are doing now, we are exporting our savings to finance American progress. So these are all the things we have to do, because what we see in recent months, if you don't grow economically, you evaporate geopolitically. In rearming, you mentioned, Mr. Ivanc, I'm not that sure. I still am a kid of generation of 78 that grew up in the 90s, and I really believe that the world without arms can exist. You know, when you produce a tank, you have to destroy it in order to build a new one. It's much different than the automotive sector, where every European family in 7 years replaces the car. So, of course, it's a necessity in order to build European strength, to rely on our own. But I wouldn't count on this to be a new European miracle, because, you know, Europe evolved, Europe advanced when it was a promise. And I still believe that Europe has to do a lot more to deliver on its promise.
Maybe just...
You're welcome.
A quick follow-up thinking from my side. Why do we export savings? Where are the profits made? Profits are made, the majority of profits at the IT company level. And software IT companies are stationed in US. Probably that's the main reason, which explains the structure of our economy is different. We have more industrials, banks. They have ROE of 10 to 12%, no big growth. Whereas at the IT company, you have one cost. And the more you have the customer, the costs are almost the same, and this is where the profits are made. That explains, you know, probably why we export. So probably we would need to, let's say, stimulate those IT companies.
Can I reflect on that?
Sure.
Yes, we do. With Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, the digital technologies and advanced digital technologies, including quantum, IT, bioinformatics, these are the sectors we want to support in Europe. However, yes, it is also analysis from the Draghi report. Where is the difference between the productivity growth in the US in the last 2 decades and in Europe? They bet on new industries. And 20 years ago, a lot of the highest valued companies in US stock market didn't exist, or were still in the garage or a very early stage. One of the dependencies we have, we often think about the dependencies in terms of fossil fuels or solar photovoltaics that we are importing from China. We are digitally unsovereign and really dependent on the American technologies. We have a 450 million people, 29 European businesses, a huge market, the biggest, when we look at the purchasing power, the biggest global market, with exceptional potential to build European technologies and European growth.
Yeah, but by the way, in terms of purchasing parity, I think China is the first with 20%, followed by US 14.7%, and EU has 40%. Measured by dollars, US first 26%, and then you have China and EU 27 with 70% each. That's very interesting. But by the way, for African countries, imagine the GDP is almost not properly measured. So when accounting for the services part of the economy, which is not measured, the African countries are much larger than we currently think, you know.
No, absolutely. A lot of the African economies are in the informal sector, which doesn't enter into GDP. And we don't rebase our economies as often. When I was finance minister, we rebased our economy, went from about $200 billion to $500 billion then. This was in 2014, although it's been rebased and gone down again. So yeah, a lot to be done.
And as you know, for trade, the geography matters, and Africa is close to Europe. Nigeria is a rich country, if I'm correct, more than 200 million people, the largest African country. So definitely among 200 million, you at least have 1% of ultra-wealthy, which would purchase our products, you know. But definitely you have to have logistics, and I would say you also need to have expert military force, especially in the region. But if I'm correct, the EU army is mostly left the African continent, you know. Because in some cases, in some insurgencies, you definitely need the force. because those markets are more differently than
Africa will have, Africa has 1.4 billion people. It will have the largest population of young people by 2050. It will have the labor that the world needs, provided we can manage to skill them. I'm from WTO, but since you mentioned Africa, I'm very African. I have to tell you that if I was a smart businessman or woman at this time, I would definitely be looking at networks, building, diversifying to the continent, trying to build supply chains. By the way, we have an African continental free trade area, which will knit the entire continent of 1.4 billion consumers into one market. It's happening now. And if Europe and European businesses don't take advantage of it, they're looking back instead of forward. And if the US said, you are over-dependent on their market, you're over-dependent on the US for markets and over-dependent on China for supplies, you have to diversify to other parts of the world. I rest my case.
You're right. So, Mr. Síkela, you have new ideas for new agreements.
Yeah, indeed. This is where the global gateway is coming from. And I can only agree. Africa is the fastest growing continent. We will see a growth of about 1 billion population in 2050. We have to expect 60 million newcomers on the labor market in the next 5 years. In the continent, which is very rich, but which is representing just 2% of the industrial output of the world. So with the global gateway, we want to hit more targets with one shot. The first one, we are sticking to our climate change ambitions. So we want to support sustainability, sustainable growth, sustainable energy sources. Why mainly in Africa? The first thing is the conditions are excellent for solar, for green hydrogen production, even for the wind. Africa is a continent which is responsible for less than 5% of the CO2 emissions, but meanwhile tackling more than 90% of climate change consequences. And there are countries which are spending huge amounts of their GDP, up to 10%, just to solve the consequences of the climate change. The growth of the population, there is a huge potential, there are huge ambitions, but there is also a big threat, because we need jobs for this young generation. We need to create a sustainable future. So we can use the European standards and European technologies in order to invest in the sustainable future, but we need to create jobs. We need to create supply chains on the continents. And by creating supply chains, we have to allow them the access to the world markets. So we need the transport corridors, we need the ports, because it cannot be the case that the countries are producing coffee or cocoa beans, but are not able to produce any single bar of chocolate. And the cocoa is shipped to Shanghai, and when you want to buy, the chocolate in Africa, then it is produced somewhere else, and then this is about the sustainability, and this is about the combination, how to use the advanced know-how and the new technologies in order to cover the climate change needs, but to invest in the sustainable future for both, because by investing in other continents, we are also talking about the resilience and about the economic security of Europeans, about the new markets for the European businesses, about maybe the new frameworks for trade arrangements, but also about tackling the root causes of the migration. If you look back to Davos and if you basically see what the businesses see as the biggest threat for the future, climate changes, the weather events due to the climate changes and the migration issues are basically still on the top of these major threats for the economic future. And I have to say that this idea of partnership of equals, of arrangements based on the mutual benefits, which on one side will help to create the jobs and the supply chains, and on the other side might also be an important part to reduce the dominance of China when it comes to processing of close to 70% of the raw materials, which can be weaponized in the future. And we have, as a Europeans, our own experience being dependent on the Russian fossil fuels, and we paid a fortune for solving these problems a few years ago. So it's getting more and more attention, talking about green steel production in Namibia, talking about the projects in Central Asia, like Rogun, where with the participation of European technologies and companies, the sustainable future is created on the spot.
So let's move now to Asia to ask our colleague from Japan. Maybe a bit shorter remark, if I may ask, because we're quite short on time. What's the Japan's view on the WTO and the international trade system? If I'm correct, publicly, Japan was, let's say, made quite a quick deal with the US. It was quite supportive on the pressure. This is what I could read from the public media. But do you still see the, let's say, the current US president moves more as an outlier or also more as a rule, also for some other additional countries? How do you see this in Japan?
Thank you very much. Let me start with our official answer to that question as a Minister of Japan. We are able to preserve the multilateral trading system, WTO at its core, and we should do it. Considering this, we must not forget the fact that the current WTO framework has been built upon the history of the global division and the disruption. And, our Prime Minister already told you, the DG Okonjo, about the WTO reform to be done. And having said that, I have to talk about the more importance of the geopolitical aspect right now. I've been have some relation with the Central and Eastern Europe. I'm the Chief Secretary of the Japan and the Slovenian Friendship League of Japanese Parliament, and I have also acting other friendship league like Poland.
Just a quick comment for the public. Did you know that GDP per capita of Japan is very similar to GDP per capita of Slovenia? And also the South Koreans' GDP per capita is also similar. So, just for your information, sorry for interruption.
So the Poland and Lithuania. And I had 10 years ago, I had a chance to visit Lithuania. And where one of the parliamentarians told me that we are in front of the liberty and the democracy in each side of the Eurasian continent. It didn't hit the link so much at the moment 10 years ago, but after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, we know what that means. In Japan, in front of the liberty and the democracy, there's Taiwan in danger, just like Ukraine in danger. we've been actually accommodate Russia and China to WTO. And in Asia, I have to say that we create a monster. If they come into peacefully join our economy, it's okay, but their activity in like Senkaku Islands or some other place is very hegemonic, and that's a problem. And what we have to, of course, climate change, okay, yes, and I agree to cope with that issue. But I think most important part is that the fundamental value, that's the liberty and democracy and human rights and the rule of laws, and how the WTO and our the free countries accommodate those values into the trade or economy. Economics has been considered as a law politics, but now we face that economic cohesion and those national security rates to the economic issue right now. It's high politics right now, and I hope that EU take a leadership on this value issue. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Comment. There you go.
Yes, so it's very clear that trade is not being seen in isolation. Trade is being used as an instrument to solve many non-trade issues. As I said before, the tariffs is not just about tariffs, it's about 6 or 7 other things. Now, under those circumstances, and given the fact that the WTO, people do not understand that it's made up of its members. So there's no WTO sitting that to be blamed. When I hear members talking about WTO did this, WTO allowed China, WTO did, who is WTO? It is you're criticizing yourselves. It is WTO members, yes, who 30 years ago got together, created this. They decided that it was time to admit China. China came in. They expected China would reform and become a pure market economy. It didn't quite do that. It did a lot of reforms. It didn't do all the reforms the way they thought it would. But China entered the global trading system. If you notice this, and you notice that some of the agreements and rules should be changed to accommodate the new entrants, and you didn't do it. And it's been 30 years, and now everybody is blaming some WTO. There's no WTO. It's you guys need to blame yourselves. And what I'm saying now is, let's stop with the blame game, okay? It is time for action. I'm an action person. There's a unique window now where China is listening and seeing that the system is not sustainable the way it is. We either seize that opportunity and push for reform, or we continue to blame WTO. We have a choice. And I think we should seize the opportunity now to begin the reforms. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Mr. Mrak, thank you very much for your patience. Would you like to provide a quick comment?
Well, that's usually the role of the academics to be maybe in the last 5 minutes, if there is time.
No, we have enough time.
Anyway, I would like, since you did not pose the question, maybe that was wise, because otherwise I would make the question, because I would like to reflect to the 2 topics which you put as the main topics of the whole thing. One is the WTO, and I would strongly agree what you said. The WTO and the whole thing what's going on, trade is a part of a much broader issue. We are talking about basically a change of the global economic governance in general, where we go from a type of an arrangement which was established after the Second World War with kind of the rules, with a very strong role of multilateral institutions. WTO is one on the trade side. We had a similar institution on the exchange rate issues, IMF, the World Bank, and so on. And so why I'm saying this? Because the world which was established at that time was a world which was kind of rule-based. Please, this is not a naive in a sense that that was perfect, right? But there were certain rules which were, established, and they were respected for a certain time. During the globalization, the world was basically going on economic grounds. Companies were going to the other part of the world on economic ground. There was not much of the political interference. Always was there a politics. But I started my career in the big 70s when we discussed the country risk. Country risk was an issue. 30 years there was no country risk issue. Now we are talking about not a country risk, we are talking about the geopolitical risks. 3 reasons I think are there. You also mentioned some of them in your speech. Of course, one is these technological changes. The other big issue is that there is certain change in the globalization process. That's clear. I'm not saying that the globalization is, decreasing, ending, but there is a change. We have the issue on the financial side, on the trade side. We have kind of, let's say, level off after decades of high growth. But on the, informatics, we have continued this. So I'm not of the ones saying that globalization is on decline, globalization and so on. But it's obviously different. And one thing, Chinese looked at the globalization very different than, let's say, the Western world. Very differently. Their strategy of globalization was very clearly seen through the investments. The green, this Silk Road, the ports, the building the railways, transportation inland, and so on. And the third thing is we are not having anymore the world of one major power, but it's a multipolar world. And there are frictions among them, and now we are part of this. So we are going into a new world, and what's going on in the trade area is one segment of this. What is true, that is the Trump, this has been it has been accelerated. But the process is going on for at least one decade. That's one thing what I think is good to have in mind.
Your base case for tariffs, your base case for US tariffs, do you expect them to remain in place also if another president would take the reign in
I think that the tariffs should not be really taken as an exclusively trade instrument. I mean, I understand. Manufacturing. I mean, what Trump is doing, he's raising revenues. Don't forget his background, what he is saying. I'm looking what was the policy, the public finance policy of the US at the end of the 19th century, where tariffs were a significant revenue of public finances.
So it's closing the fiscal deficit, Mr. Mrak?
Yeah, well, closing. I would say it is maybe reducing it a little bit and opening the door for other policy promises which he has given in terms of the taxes. So, but the point is, it's not just a tariff. The tariff instrument. As far as the European deal, I think I would go to what the commissioner said. Not you, but the commissioner for trade. He said that that's the best deal we can get at this moment. I think it's pretty true. Guys, we are, in my view, in such a security unequal position that we were not able to go into negotiations similarly of the way what China was doing, or to some extent also Canada, but as you see, they have also stepped back. So it's not the trade issue, that's my point. Europe has a lot of issues, and there was discussion to do something on the services side. But you have to think 2 steps forward, what you will do if you will introduce sanctions, some things on the tariffs on the services, because then probably some internet issues will come to play, and so on. So that's one thing on the WTO. For the EU, I think it should really do much more on trying to orchestrate, to help those ones who are still, what was said, 75%, I read 80% of the global trade goes on the WTO terms. It's come down. It goes down. So anyway, but it's still a significant part, and Europe should here really be the one trying to put them together. It's a funny thing that the small countries are now trying to organize these things. That was just now a few days back in the Financial Times, which is fine, but this will not do the thing. But reform of the WTO, that's clear. On Draghi report, I will not be that candid on the Draghi report. I think Draghi, on the report as such, yes. But what I would like to say, Draghi report and also Letta report, they provided a pretty good framework what to do, but there is not so many things which were new. The problem is not what to do in Europe, but how to do this. And then there were 2 key issues, and both are highly political. One is money, and the other one is decision-making. On the money side, after 1 year, I can tell you that we have gone in a bad way. The proposal of the European Commission on the EU budget does not address really financially significantly the Draghi report.
We have
Draghi
a lot of ideas,
everywhere.
but not enough money, if I'm
Can
correct.
I just finish this? And on the decision-making issue, I think it's the problem is that competitiveness issue cannot be dealt with the existing council structure in the EU. Why not? Because you have so many parallel councils which deal with the competition. So we have first to discuss which structure of the council is responsible to do this. I'm afraid that on a competition we will have similar problems what we have with the Lisbon strategy. There is one thing what we should do quickly, and it would be much more powerful than the negative effect of the tariffs, is to do something on the internal market, for example, capital markets, or savings, whatever it calls it. But open it a little bit more. You know, the first thing we can even ask in Slovenia, are we ready to do this? So it's not a criticism of the Commission again.
Sure.
Just remember how the Commissioner was negotiating because there was no agreement among the member states what is the negotiation position. So we have internal problems to play on the global role, but I'm deeply convinced if we will not address these things seriously over the next, during this Commission, Parliament, then we will not be sitting at the table in 5 years.
So you're saying we need political changes?
We need a political, political will for changes.
Yeah. But definitely then anonymous, all the member states.
I think on the foreign policy issue, if we want to be a partner, I know I'm from a small country, and that would be an issue in Slovenia. You cannot have an EU being a global partner based on the decision making that you have everything to need all the countries to adopt. Exactly. We don't have a position on Ukraine, we don't have a position on Middle East, Palestine, we have on anything. So if you don't have a position on anything, why should the other big players ask us for our position? So yes, I think we would need for the foreign policy, if we are serious about the EU as a global partner, qualified majority voting.
Thank you, Mr. Mrak. Great remarks. Mr. Takinami, you raised your hand?
Yeah. In relation with the drug report, the innovation is important to overcome the dependency to China or some other place. For example, the solar panel require the lithium, and China produce a lot, and Japan do not have. So what's going on in Japan is right now is we use the iodine. That is Japan produce second largest in the world. So we create the new technology. Okay. Actually, that's very flexible, and it can become very soft and like a covered columns or something like that. So those innovation can overcome the over dependency or something like that. And in the sense of the drug report, it's not innovation is not just R&D. We have to think about beyond the laboratory and how to implement the society. So that's a complement to the drug report from my
So we have to simulate new technologies to cut the reliance on specific partners. So this is what is already well written in the report. A quick remark, Mr. Frangež.
I totally agree with what Professor Mrak said. And let me just say it in the rearm Europe sense, right? I'm not particularly interested in building a strong German army, strong French army, strong Polish, Slovene, whatever army. But what I'm interested in, and I think it should be the role model, it's creating a European defense forces, not only because of, the European idea and European spirit and centuries of war between those nations that now present European Union together, but also because it is economically logical. It is one thing to invest in each of the nations' defense capacities, or to invest them in a pan-European way, combining, consolidating, and building synergies between the strengths of each country. So what we, and I totally agree with the economic governance, by the way, this is also a chapter and recommendation of the Draghi report, that yes, we have a strong fragmentation, not only because there are 27 markets, but we have a strong fragmentation because there are 27 countries deciding on the issue, and there are 2 years minimum to bring a legislative act through Europe. And there is also a fragmentation within the European Commission. The new European Commission is really fragmented, and I would say that the competition is an ownership of 7, 8 European commissioners. And this is not a good thing. What we should do in European Union, faced with a variety of new challenges, is actually to build on further integration, further consolidation, also through the decision-making process, that will inevitably bring also a concentration of certain European decisions in the central level. But it's absolutely logical, economical, and if we want for the European project to survive, to evolve, to develop, and not to be taken as a hostage by a new right-wing populists, well, this concentration and consolidation should be the way to go.
But I think the most difficult part would be, you know, if we have, well, let's say, one army or only one producer of specific weaponry, which would, of course, increase the efficiency, reduce the costs, would be, of course, who will be the nation where that facility would stand, and, of course, who would be the general, probably.
Well, yeah, but look at Airbus. We have a great example from the past. Airbus was built as European enterprise, European corporation. It is still a global leader in the class of passenger aviation. It was built as a European corporation with production and headquarter facilities in various states.
But something is civil aviation, something is military thing, you know, to be very honest. Are we there in terms of thinking that, do we trust each other in the long term?
Is there any other way?
We still have a couple of minutes, so Director General of WTO had to leave. This was not made as a protest move, but she has to catch a plane. Do we have any specific question from a fellow Bled Strategic Forum, which would be here and would like to ask the participants, please? Please do not lose the seconds, just raise your hand, you'll get the microphone. Fellow BSF? No? Then some other participant, just raise your hand, please. Because, yeah, your hand. Sir, just microphone, please. Yeah. Please.
Thank you. Interesting insights. I was hoping for a little more on the future strategic direction in terms of economic competitiveness of Europe and how it's being positioned. But it's also, at the end, a geopolitical issue. And I didn't hear any real discussion about, there was a little mention, I must say, but how geopolitics are changing, how we're seeing the emergence of new actors in the global economy, what that implies for how trade patterns and production patterns will change. And nobody mentioned the SCO meeting that took place with 26 heads of state yesterday, uniting some of the biggest economic actors for the future who are looking at the world in a very different way today. What are the implications of that for Europe for the future in terms of its alignment?
Would someone like to take his comment, or Professor?
I heard a great PowerPoint presentation by Professor Mrak exactly on this issue, so I think he's the one to be called.
Well, I will comment it maybe from the European Union perspective. What does it mean, in my view, these geopolitical issues which are going on in the world? So, in my view, we will see on the short run, globally, I think what Trump is doing will have a significant long-term influences on the structure. But on a little bit longer run, I'm talking about, let's say, decade and so on, I think the world will basically be shaped within the relationship between three large poles. One is the West, which is not anymore kind of united, leading, of course, by the US. If we would have this discussion last year, then we will talk about the US, EU, and so on. Now I'm not sure that this is united anymore. You have then the East, where you have, in my view, on this eastern side, China is positioning itself as the de facto leader of this part. If we look, for example, what was going on with the BRICS, over the last years, BRICS have enlarged from, I don't know, 5 to 11, but it's interesting to see which countries became part of the BRICS. There was a big differences, let's say, between China and India about the future of BRICS. China was very much pro-enlargement of BRICS, while India was not very much, was against this. What happened was we do have enlargement, and we do have enlargement with those countries which are, in a way, supportive to Chinese position. So, in my view, Russia, in these circumstances of the war with Ukraine, is in bilateral relations with China. Is still in a kind of an inferior position. So China, in my view, is positioning itself as the leader of this part. Of course, then we have the whole South, the global South, developing countries. Here you have some large ones, a lot of small ones. And we are seeing this, let's say, competition for the South, where particularly, let's say, Africa and so on, we see that China is de facto gaining. China is today a major trading partner with more than 80 countries, major creditors of many of the countries. Right? China, at the beginning of the century, was not a net creditor. Today, it is the largest net creditor in Africa. You have, if you look the investments, 10 years ago, China was, in terms of FDIs, not really present in Latin America. Today, it is very strongly there. Of course, why? Particularly for the rare earths portfolio controlling this, what we have seen were a very powerful instrument of China responding to Trump reducing the exports. So that's one thing. In future, I would also see that this bipolarization of the world will, in my view, going on. China, US, two big poles. If you look at the currency issues, we see that yuan is today already close to the position of dollar in terms of the payment instruments, not in terms of the reserve currency. But China doesn't want, for the time being, to be a reserve currency because it also takes some responsibility. But it's a matter of time where it will be. We have the paying systems which are de facto already divided. SWIFT is not anymore a global one. We do have parallelization. So this bifurcation might be, and you can talk with the people in businesses, those ones who are present in all the markets, they feel this already. Sometimes they come into a situation that they have to choose. Because if I work with one, I will have problems working with the other one. And this is probably not a very good environment for doing business.
Mr. Mrak, thank you very much. The last question, sir.
Yes, sir. Zelo kratek dva komentarja. Eden je za komisarja, Evropa, 470 milijonov ljudi, nima enega telefona. Imate Samsung, imate Huawei, pa še enega, pa Apple. Evropa ne investira dosti v IT, tako kot Kitajska. Moj bivši šef na Svetovni banki, Joe Stiglitz, je rekel, Kitajsko občudujem, 400 milijonov ljudi je spravljati z absolutne poverty, kar se pa Afrike tiče. Ngozi je bila moja šolka na MIT-ju, na PhD programu, oba dva se tam učila, sva bila na top of the class. Lanskoletni Nobelovec Daron Acemoglu je napisal knjigo, dobil Nobelovo nagrado, je rekel, za Afrika rabi inštitucije.
Why nations fail, ne?
So prišli Britanci, Belgijci, Francozi, kolonisti so jih skorumpirali, so jih pobili, so jih zasužnili, so jim zemljo ukradli in tega se ne morejo rešiti. Hvala lepa.
Thank you very much also for your comment. So this is it. I would conclude our panel. The key takeaways would be, I'm sorry, I'm not possible to provide another opening question. Really? Jernej is saying no, no, no. So my comment would be that, yeah, we need to preserve the WTO in this sense or the other. And also, from my thoughts, Africa came out as possibly a solution because we have a huge market. Probably the numbers are not adding up to the real potential because they don't have the same statistics as we have. So this is for Europe a kind of a midterm solution that which I would see. And definitely for the drug use recommendations, they're quite okay. I also saw there were a lot of institutions written behind the report, but definitely for the implementation part, as you're saying, Mr. Mrak, what needs to be done is that we have to reform basically how the EU functions to be able to really address those challenges that were mentioned in the document. Thank you very much, everyone, for being present on this panel. Thank you.